the open deserts on the edge of the Sahara, Russian mercenaries have fought a bitter war against jihadist operatives for years, trading their guns, their expertise, and at times their lives in exchange for critical resources and cash from the Sahel region's trio of military regimes. Wagner have been locked into battle with a violent terrorist organization known as JNIM. Those battles have been at their most intense in the nation of Mali, a vast expanse that's home to uranium, gold, and about 22 million people. In early June, the Wagner Group declared victory in Mali and announced that its fighters would withdraw from the nation triumphant. But on the ground, the reality is far from what Wagner would have the world believe. Jihadist forces now number in the thousands, overrunning one major military base after another and targeting both the military governments of the region and Russian mercenary forces themselves. By all credible accounts, Wagner is fleeing Mali with its tail between its legs, running from a fight with the most dangerous terrorist insurgency in the world today. By the end of May, warning lights were already flashing across the three military-led nations of the African Sahel. Those countries, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, have been locked into a conflict with the terror group JNIM for over half a decade. Their organization, known in full as Jama'at Nasser al-Islam wal-Muslimin, has been widely recognized as the world's fastest-growing terror organization since 2022, with its strength currently estimated to be anywhere from 5,000 fighters today to well over 10,000 and growing. Allied to Al-Qaeda and present everywhere from Libya to Mauritania to Chad to Benin, JNIM has notched major victories in the last year, from an attack in Mali last September that killed over 100 people to attacks on Benin military bases that killed 70 soldiers in April. By the end of this May, however, the warning signs seem to show that JNIM was beginning a surge, with over 400 soldiers killed by the insurgents since the start of the month alone. Those soldiers hailed from the same three military regimes where JNIM has always been aggressive, but now carries out its attacks with impunity. And if the month of May was difficult for the Sahel's military regimes, then it took almost no time for JNIM to prove that the month of June would be far worse. Now, on the first of the month, JNIM fighters carried out a coordinated series of attacks on three military bases, two of them in Burkina Faso, one over in Mali. Riding on vast swarms of motorcycles and using assault rifles and explosives, the JNIM fighters used overflying drones to help coordinate their attacks. They proved to be practically unstoppable for the soldiers they were attacking, relying on their high mobility tactics and their intense pace of attack to sow chaos and then to exploit it. On each of the two military bases in Burkina Faso, dozens of soldiers were reported dead or wounded, while on the military base in Mali, at the border town of Bouakessi, the situation was even worse. An early death toll in the low dozens has only kept climbing, and local reports suggest that JNIM may have slaughtered 300 Malian soldiers in that attack alone. For most terror organizations, that sort of assault would have been a landmark achievement, a clear demonstration of their power and a blow to national confidence in each country's military regime. But JNIM hasn't been a normal terror organization for some time. Instead, it's a group with the size, strength, and tactical competence to morph into a full-blown insurgency capable of launching complex military offensives against regional governments. And as JNIM very quickly made clear, its series of attacks on June the 1st were part of a broader ongoing offensive. The next day, JNIM fighters showed up in the city of Timbuktu in Mali's heartland and stormed another military base, first hitting it with a large truck bomb and then surging in with fighters on foot and motorcycle who had worn captured uniforms of Malian soldiers. Again, the main thrust of the attack was accompanied by assaults elsewhere, this time on a trio of military checkpoints across the city. And not only that, but they also hit a military airfield where none other than the Wagner Group based its local operations. Now, it's not known whether Wagner mercenaries were killed in the attack, but by targeting Timbuktu directly, JNIM demonstrated an ability to disrupt a critical regional supply hub that enables military operations all across the country. From that point onward, the mayhem only continued. JNIM hit several convoys with roadside bombs over the following days, at least two of which also had Russian mercenaries riding along, and one of which was just barely outside Mali's capital city of Bamako. Around the same time, JNIM hit yet another military barracks, more outposts, local police stations, and compounds where ethnic militias base their fighters in an attempt to fight against the jihadists. Several targets were hit in Burkina Faso and Niger, but the violence was increasingly centered on Mali. Other insurgent groups took advantage of the chaos, with the Sahel's local branch of the Islamic State launching an attack on a Malian base that it says killed at least 40 more soldiers. Under such relentless pressure, Mali's military has started to withdraw from exposed forward operating positions in hopes that their remaining soldiers can be protected. It was against this very same backdrop that the Wagner Group declared it was leaving Mali at what appeared to be a very strange moment to declare victory. That, of course, didn't stop the mercenary outfit. Quoting from their statement on Telegram, "Mission accomplished. Private military company Wagner returns home." By the story that Wagner told, the organization had seized control of all of Mali's regional capital cities, handed them over to the Malian military, and killed all of JNIM's senior commanders. Unfortunately, however, that version of events bore precious little resemblance to the reality on the ground. Today's sponsor, Raycon, make incredible earbuds. These are the everyday earbuds, and they make a fantastic gift, whether that's for someone else or just for yourself. They're affordable, they're comfortable, and yes, they've got active noise cancellation, which is a kind of a small miracle at the price point these things are sold for. Plus, they've got all sorts of fantastic colors. I've got a case on mine, actually, that they sent me separately, which I rather like. I'll just pop that off. Can see mine are black. I put a more interesting case on there just for fun. Plus the batteries, legit 32 hours with the case. Quick charge lets you get 90 minutes of listen time in just 10 minutes of charging. There's multi-point pairing too, so you can swap from your phone to your iPad without you having to fuss around with the Bluetooth settings, which no one enjoys doing. So look, try Raycon today, whether you're walking, editing, zoning out while pretending to clean. Raycon will be there for you. So go to buyraycon.com/warfronts and get 20% off site-wide. That's buyraycon.com/warfronts, brought to you by Raycon. And just before we continue today, let me put a quick plug in for our newsletter, because we actually already covered this story, albeit a little bit briefer, in the newsletter last week on last Friday. It actually keeps you right up to date with stuff that we can't quite get out on time on this YouTube channel. So, if you'd like to check out our newsletter, please do find a link to it below. It's absolutely free to sign up, and it goes out twice a week, so check it out. And back to the video. Alright, now it clearly isn't lost on us here at WarFronts that the JNIM insurgency in the Sahel is only minimally covered in global news, if it's even discussed at all. So, although we won't be delving into a full explanation of the history of this conflict in today's episode, we've got to take at least just a few moments to put some things in context for you. First up, there's the question of what the Wagner Group is even doing in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, to which the simple answer is regime protection. The Wagner Group and other Russian mercenary elements are deployed all across the globe, although primarily to Africa, on missions just like this one. Operating in numbers of a few hundred on the low end to a few thousand on the high end, these mercenaries basically offer local ruling governments a deal. Wagner gets to oversee and profit off of lucrative mining operations, send oil or critical minerals to Moscow, otherwise get themselves paid and do whatever the hell they'd like in dealing with locals, while in return, the local regime gets direct protection and military assistance in dealing with domestic or transnational insurgencies. It is an arrangement that has upsides for everyone, although really it's Wagner and Russia that get the best parts of the deal. Wagner operatives manage vast networks of shell corporations and money laundering enterprises, and in most cases, they typically don't end up in the line of fire. In Mali, as well as Burkina Faso and Niger, Wagner has played an increasingly important role after a series of military coups in the early 2020s, when all three nations' militaries overthrew their respective elected governments and kicked out French and American troops who had managed counterinsurgent efforts for years. It was Wagner that took the opportunity to jump into the gap, especially in Mali, where the group has maintained a strong presence for several years now. But although most Wagner Group deployments in Africa have generally been far less strenuous than, say, a deployment to Ukraine, Mali has recently proved to be the exception to that rule. Wagner troops have been killed en masse in Mali on multiple occasions, most notably in an ambush during a sandstorm in the high desert in July of 2024. The Wagner death toll from that battle varies wildly, but the numbers are believed to be anywhere between 25 Russians killed to more than 80, along with dozens of soldiers from Mali. In that battle, Wagner forces were ambushed by two separate organizations, first by ethnic Tuareg rebels, and then by JNIM, when Tuareg snipers pushed the Wagner-supported forces into retreat and drove them into more of a second ambush organized by JNIM. With Russia's backing, the three military regimes of the Sahel have worked to take their security into their own hands, withdrawing from a regional bloc called ECOWAS that now comprises a total of 12 West African nations. Instead, the trio formed the Alliance of Sahel States, and in January of this year, they announced a joint military force of 5,000 troops with the intent of fighting JNIM and other Islamist groups across their shared region. Those troops were said to already have begun their deployments when the three governments announced their combined operation, meaning that they should have been well into their mission by now, but all indications are that they've been unable to stop JNIM from carrying out attacks. In fact, although it's not clear how many of the recently killed soldiers were a part of that force, the dozens or hundreds killed in border area military bases may well have represented that deployment. Regardless, the fact that JNIM is now conducting mass casualty assaults at such high rates is a glaring indicator that the efforts of the regional bloc have failed. Alright, so as we look ahead to the immediate future of this conflict, we've really got to emphasize that there are no guarantees about what's going to happen next. The JNIM insurgency is highly asymmetric. It thrives on its own unpredictability, and it's excellent at exploiting the chaos it creates in order to rapidly shift its operating focus to new areas that were thought to be safe. That said, we can at least observe a couple of recent trends that seem to be guiding events over the last few weeks. First, JNIM's focus on Burkina Faso in May appears to have shifted toward Mali thus far in the month of June. JNIM's decision to attack Mali's capital city as well as Timbuktu indicate that the group believes its warfighters have very little to worry about in areas where the military maintains a strong presence, and that conclusion is only furthered by their willingness to attack large military bases directly. The group has slowed its pace of attacks after a frenetic few days, but given that JNIM tends to surge and then subside in its attacks in a fairly regular rhythm, we don't anticipate that this brief slowdown will become permanent. Instead, we anticipate that another large wave of attacks will probably come next, although it's very important to emphasize that JNIM could just as easily be planning to attack areas it softened up or turn its attention to new targets that the prior wave of violence didn't touch. It's all contingent on the tactical and strategic objectives that JNIM are working to achieve, and as of right now, their attacks don't seem to be prioritizing a clear target. Instead, the objective seems to be one of maximum disruption wherever and whenever that can be caused. Now, on the other side of the conflict, it's important to note that the departure of the Wagner group does not equate to the departure of all Russian mercenaries. Instead, a parallel mercenary organization, the Africa Corps, is already active in Mali and is expected to surge more fighters into the nation to fill the gap. The Africa Corps is directly under the control of Russia's Ministry of Defense, and it contains former Wagner elements who've been transitioned into the new organization following the death of Wagner's leaders in 2023. US officials suggest that around 2,000 Russian mercenaries are in Mali altogether, although it's less clear how many of those troops were from Wagner versus the Africa Corps. It's important to note here that there is a world in which Mali is simply switching over to the Africa Corps in full, especially considering that Wagner have perpetrated all manner of summary executions of civilians, forced disappearances, torture, and more. In fact, their consistent willingness to carry out atrocities and train the Malian military to do the same are a big part of why JNIM has had such success. In rural parts of the country, where Wagner and its Malian counterparts can operate with impunity, they sometimes even have a worse reputation than the jihadists, thus driving locals into the ranks of JNIM directly. But even if Wagner really is being ushered out by Russia instead of the more likely reality that they've abandoned Mali as the going has gotten tough, it's an open question whether the Africa Corps can produce any better results than Wagner did. They are, after all, advisors to Mali's military, capable of fighting alongside them, but not doing their jobs for them. In fact, judging by prior deployments, the Africa Corps appears to be much less focused on frontline fighting than remaining Wagner elements and instead serve in more of a dedicated support role. Mali has announced that its military will begin a mass counter-offensive with targets all across the nation, but it's far from clear that those troops will actually be able to achieve much. JNIM operates in a highly asymmetric fashion, as we mentioned, and it's in its element while waging guerrilla warfare in remote regions, and between its swarms of motorbikes, its captured mortars, and its military trucks and its highly mobile fighting style, it may be entirely capable of engaging the expeditionary forces that Mali will send. Those troops will face an even steeper challenge by fighting in more places and in fewer numbers, inherently evening the odds with local insurgents that they may be encountering, instead of massing their forces to hit a smaller list of specific targets. In a broader sense, it's not clear that Mali's military can gather the required intelligence to carry out those operations or counter the jihadists in direct combat. Quite frankly, Mali has been unable to stop JNIM from attacking whatever it wants, whenever it wants, including concentrations of hundreds of Mali's own troops in a given location where the military's deterrent value should be at its strongest. If JNIM simply believes it has nothing to fear from the Malian military, then Mali can suppose that every battle will be an uphill battle. And as JNIM continues to notch victories against Mali, it only grows more powerful. Right now, JNIM is the most potent insurgency in the nation, with the Islamic State certainly able to make its own gains, but nowhere near as definitively as JNIM, nor across such a vast span of territory. JNIM lays claim to a political mandate, fighting back against the military government in defense of the ethnic Fulani people, and its claim has only been validated by the frequent atrocities of Malian and Russian fighters in this conflict. Whenever it takes over territory, even briefly, JNIM makes a point of occupying administrative buildings and key infrastructure locations as if to raise a middle finger toward the region's governments and say, look, we could be in charge too, can't we? According to analysts via the Sufan Center, JNIM may even have the strength to take over the capital city of Bamako outright, while in Burkina Faso, a stronger capital city could conceivably hold out. But the countryside is largely in jihadist hands. While Niger is in a relatively better position than its neighbors, it could very well find itself even more isolated, forced to cope all by itself once JNIM turns its attention eastward. And with Wagner now abandoning its support for the government in Mali, there's another possibility to consider, that the military regime may be facing yet another internal coup. If it happens, it wouldn't be the first time. In Burkina Faso, military elements attempted coups against their own leadership on 3 separate occasions in 2021, 2022, and 2024. Each time, those coup attempts came in the wake of massive JNIM victories. Now Burkina Faso's in a similar position, and the military regime in Mali, previously far more resilient against those sorts of uprisings, could be in a situation where junior officers see the departure of Wagner and the defeats of their superiors and choose their moment to strike. No matter what happens now, it is abundantly clear that JNIM has seized the initiative in the Sahel, and that the 3 military regimes of the region, especially the nation of Mali, are in a lot of trouble. In a situation like this, we really couldn't blame the Wagner group for getting the hell out while they can. But if that is indeed what Wagner hopes to achieve, then their departure sends a very clear signal about where this part of the world is headed. Thank you for watching.